Good evening. Hello. Oh, I hope you had a good week. Um, it's been a week of interesting contrasts for us. Um, After the week of really hot weather and everything being uh, difficult because of how hot and just overwhelming the temperature was, we've had a week in which I had lots of jobs to do outside, lots of things that I'd started in the hot weather, and it's been chucking it down all week. And it doesn't really matter whether I wanted to or not. Um, the reality is the rain comes, and the Bible says it falls on everybody, falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. I always chuckle about that verse because in my life I tend to think of it as the rain being a bad thing that all of us have to put up with. But of course, to God's people Israel, when uh, that statement was originally made, the rain was a blessing of God. A blessing of God is available. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've come from. God blesses because it's in his nature to bless. It is in the nature of God to show kindness, to show mercy, to provide what he has promised. Still, the bad weather has given me a good excuse to spend a lot of time watching the Olympics. I don't know if you're into Olympic sport or not. Um, People who know me would probably find it strange that I spend as much time watching it as I do, because the rest of the year I show very little interest in most sports, with the exception of American football and rugby. But I've been really enjoying watching the Olympics these last few days in particular, and even today in the competitions that happened overnight and the last couple of nights, watching has just really reminded me of the things that God says about who we are. One of the commentators who was commentating on the new sports, some of the urban sports that have made it into the Olympics finally, particularly the BMX and the street skating, was talking about how, in his opinion, they show what human beings are really capable of. That because they have reached such a level of refinement and detail, and the fact that they knew they were going to be at this Olympics has really pushed some of the athletes to new extremes that we're beginning to see human beings really do what they're capable of. And in some ways, he's right. And I think one of the things that I love about the diversity of the Olympics is that you get to see human beings pushing their bodies in all sorts of different ways and demonstrating what we're really capable of, what most of us never attempt or achieve. But in another way, they also show that human beings struggle with the same old problems as human beings have always struggled with. And particularly the contrast in the last 24 hours between the victories of the British BMXers and the disaster for one of the British sprinters. One of our 100 meters hopefuls made it into the final despite having, in the build up to the final, found himself disqualified in one of the qualification events. To quote the commentators and the pundits, and particularly those who've raced before, I think it was Denise Lewis who said, "There's just no excuse for jumping the start. There's just no excuse. A false start is something you can train not to do." And yet, here he is in the final of the men's 100 meters, a final which was wide open because some of the world's greatest names hadn't made it or have retired. And he jumped the start. And sooner or later, in all the different commentaries that I've heard of that event, one or other of the commentators comes back to the fact that if you keep jumping the start when you're under pressure, what you're actually doing is practicing a really bad habit. And the only way to beat it is to practice a good habit, is to just work on your starts, work on waiting, work on being responsive to the sound of the starting pistol. You could see how devastated he was. It wasn't a lack of desire, it was not a lack of effort. It was that in big pressure situations, it has become something which he does. And over time, what's happening is that his body is developing muscle memory. And those moments of tension, as he's there on the starting blocks ready to launch, his body takes over, his muscles twitch, and for whatever reason, he launches well ahead of the starting pistol. It wasn't a matter of milliseconds either. He was clearly ahead. Meanwhile, in the BMX, we saw Charlotte Worthington just utterly destroy the competition. She didn't just do her biggest tricks. She didn't just do tricks that were as big as the people that she was competing against. She did tricks that had never been seen before. And what was interesting about that is that the British cyclists, and particularly actually some of the commentary team, had seen her practice. In fact, there was a video leaked to an Instagram account from the Olympic squad just a few days ago, in which she was doing tricks that had never been seen before. One trick in particular, a 360 backflip, and no female BMX has ever done it. And the video showed her doing it with great confidence, doing it actually in one of the training rides at the Olympic Park. And so when she went out on her first run, just 2 attempts they get in the Olympic final, she went out on her first run and she attempted that trick. Everybody was excited, but they didn't expect her to fail. Unfortunately, she did. And so on her first run, she put down a score that had her in very last place. And so the question started, is she going to do it again? Is she going to be able to land the run or not? Maybe she should do something safer. Maybe she should do something that might not put her on the top spot, might not give her a shot of goal, but at least she'll put a run down. Well, she didn't. She did exactly what she'd set out to do. And in her second run, she landed it. In fact, she landed not only that, but lots of other tricks, which very few of the women's BMXers are landing, certainly not in sequence. She put down the run that secured her gold, a run so outstanding that the other BMXers just had this look on their faces of, what are we supposed to do with that? And when they were interviewing her at the end, various interviews that I heard, time and again, it came back to, well, I knew I had that trick. I knew I had that trick. I knew I had that trick because I practiced it. I knew I had that trick. I've had it in practice. And so what we saw was a contrast today between 2 athletes, one of whom has developed a habit of jumping the start and needs now desperately to break it. And it's no good saying, well, he could train harder or he could do more work. And it's no good saying it's a simple thing. For whatever reason, he has developed a mental block or a physical twitch that means that he is jumping starts, and he has thrown away an opportunity that he has worked 5 years to get. Meanwhile, Charlotte Worthington, her practice means that when the push and the pressure was really on, she knew she was able to do it. I've been thinking about it a lot today. Thinking about it during our worship this morning and just in my own quiet time this afternoon, thinking about the way in which as human beings, to a certain extent, we can develop good practices. To a certain extent, we can develop habits which are positive and helpful. And that there are moments where in our lives, those habits work out for us, those practiced responses, those things which we intend to do come about. But that for all of us, ultimately, there are patterns, there are ways of living which we simply can't break. You know, with all the commentators speaking about that false start in the 100 meters, all of them acted as though he was in control, as though somehow this was something that he should have predicted, he should have foreseen. And yet I'm absolutely certain, listening to him and knowing what it takes, how much it has cost him to get to that place, that he had done everything he could. He didn't set himself up for that failure. He hasn't been working at having false starts. The Bible talks about human beings and explains that for all of our good intentions, for all of our best efforts, for all of the times that we get it right, that all of us ultimately, we miss the mark sometimes. It's not to condemn people. It's not to leave people feeling like there's no way out. It's just a truth. It's not to make you think, well, I'm obviously worse than other people. In fact, it's the great leveler. We don't keep our own standards, much less God's. We are unable to escape from certain twitches, certain mistakes, certain patterns of behavior where no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we practice, no matter what we might read or whose advice we might take, we still find ourselves throwing it all away time and time again. Paul talks about his own situation. He talks about knowing the good that he should do, and yet he cannot do it. And knowing the things that he really would not do, and yet they are always present with him. And if he left it there, it would be an accurate description of the human condition, but it would be a pretty hopeless one. Then he asks, who could deliver him? Who could save him from this constraint, this limitation, the things that are binding him up? And this is what he says: thanks be to God. Thanks be to God who gives me the victory. God who saves me from the constraints of my flesh, who saves me from the limitations that otherwise I'm helpless to defeat. The Bible speaks about a God who sees us, and with every temptation that we endure provides for us a way out, that we are well able to stand up under it. You see, if I reach back into my own experience, if I consider all the different things that I've tried over the years to improve myself, to make myself better, I'll fall flat on my face again, just the same way I did last time. But if I look to him, if I fix my eyes on Jesus, if I reach out to God and say, God, you be my wisdom, you be my peace. God, you be my strength, you be my deliverer. God, I don't want to live according to my ability, but I want to live according to the ability of the God for whom all things are possible. Lord God, I'm not going to present you my goodness or my, as the Bible would put it, righteousness, but Lord God, I'm going to rest in your goodness and your righteousness. God, I'm not going to come to you with my strength, but in my weakness, your strength is made perfect. And the Bible says he will not allow my foot to stumble. He won't allow me to react in a way that destroys my hope. He won't allow me to conform to the patterns that had me trapped. Those that Jesus makes free are completely free. Free in every aspect of their living, free to live according to God's perfect will. Free to live without harm, without damage, without the disappointment of good intentions being marred by weakness, brokenness, or inadequacy. Anybody watching the Olympics, whatever sport it is you happen to be watching, will know that slight sense of awe, that slight sense of these people are just capable of different things. Listening to the discussion of Charlotte Worthington's success, they talked about the fact that just 3 years ago she was working as a chef with no intention of being an Olympic BMXer. But when you scratch the surface a little deeper, it wasn't completely out of the blue. And it wouldn't matter how much I practiced, and it wouldn't matter how hard I tried, and it wouldn't matter what coaches I paid to coach me. The reality is that I simply am never going to find myself doing a backflip 360 on a BMX. It's not in me. Not the ability, nor in fact the desire. Sometimes when you read the life of Jesus, when you read the way in which he was able to interact with people, the way in which he was able to speak truth that brought freedom, not devastating disappointment, that he was able to love without compromise, that he was able to hang out with those that religious folk had written off because they just didn't know what to do with them. And yet the friendship of Jesus and the words that he spoke, the love that he exhibited and the welcome that he offered meant that those that the world had to write off, that religion failed completely, found a welcome. And not that they stayed the same, but they were utterly transformed by his presence. And those of us who know him know that in our own experience, the presence of Christ has transformed us. It has made all things new. And yet the Bible doesn't say that we should just be near him. It says that we should be like him. It doesn't just say that we should live a life that isn't antagonistic to him, a life that isn't opposed to him, but that we should live the life that he lived. Jesus, who is the light of the world, calls you and me the light of the world. The good news is that of all the miracles he performed, of all the wonderful things that he is able to do, of all his majesty and power, the greatest single thing that God ever does through Jesus in the life of a human being is he makes us able to live with the same resurrection power, the same death defying, sin defeating life, life in all its fullness that Jesus lived. And so it will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me that I won't ever be a 100-meter sprinter or a world-class BMXer. But I can, by the grace of God, live here and now in response to my circumstances, in freedom from my past. I can live out the perfect life that Jesus lives. And so can you. You know, I sometimes worry about sharing something like this because a lot of folk only hear the first half. They only hear that they can't make it, that they can't do it. And so right now, if you're somebody and you're thinking, well, that's all very well for you, but you don't know where I've been, you don't know what I struggle with, you don't know what I'm doing. I just want to remind you before I finish, with God, all things are possible. Most people at some point have engaged with John 3:16, that famous verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But if you read on into verses 17 and 18, Jesus says that people are not condemned because of what they do. Judgment has already passed. None of us is perfect. So the difference between those who live with condemnation and those who live with freedom is not what they've done. It's not what they're capable of. But simply do they receive what he came to do. He said he didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might live. So tonight, it might be that the only limitation that holds you, the only thing that binds you, is that you don't believe that you can be free. I want to tell you that's a lie. I want to tell you that no matter where you've been, no matter what you struggle with, no matter how overwhelming it might be, no matter how embarrassed you might be about it, or how helpless you might feel before it, the truth is this, that Jesus came so that you could have life. Jesus came so that you might be free. And there is no condemnation to people who choose Jesus. Those who just say, okay, Jesus, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I believe that you can. I believe that if I follow after you, your spirit will make me able to live your life. See, belief is not about putting all your ducks in a row. The word that we translate as belief means to trust. If you're not confident in who you are, that's okay. I'm not confident in who I am. But you can be confident in who Jesus is. Tonight, every habit can be broken. every repeated failure pushed aside. Every fear of what might go wrong can be silenced because the love of God is for you. Because the life of God has been made available to you. Because the forgiveness of Jesus has already been spoken over you. And because no matter who you are, because God is in it, Jesus' promise of an abundant life, free from every chain, free from brokenness, free from all those habitual things, a life of total liberty and resurrection power is available for you. My prayer is that you live that life and that you choose to trust Jesus. God bless. Have a great week. God willing, we'll see you next weekend.